Hey, how's it going? And welcome back to Consuming Cinema, a show all about making and pairing food and drinks from popular movies and TV shows. Today we're making a Tom Collins with pot roast from Meet the Parents. If you haven't seen Meet the Parents, it's a 2000 Jay Roach remake of a 1992 film by the same name, about a man named Greg, only his name isn't really Greg. It's actually...
Gaylord M. Fokker?
I thought your name was Greg.
It is. That's not what it says on the phone.
Greg desperately wants to propose to his girlfriend Pam, so much so that he practices on the patients at the hospital he works at. So you're probably thinking, oh, okay, so Greg's a doctor. Well...
Actually, I'm a nurse.
But just as Greg is about to propose, Pam's sister calls, informing her that she just got engaged and is getting married in just a few weeks. So Greg travels with Pam to her home in New York to attend the wedding and ask for her dad's blessing, and along the way, his bag and the engagement ring inside both go missing. When they arrive, Greg meets Pam's mom, Dina, as well as her father, Jack, a man for whom the only thing he loves more than Pam is Pam's cat, Jinx.
Jinxie cat, where are you? I love you.
Jack is immediately dubious of Greg because while Jack claims to be a florist, he is actually a retired CIA counterintelligence agent. Once they settle in, Greg sits down for cocktails where Jack makes Greg his drink of choice, a Tom Collins.
Good. Tom Collins coming up.
Jack's love of the Tom Collins is later referenced in the sequel, Meet the Fockers.
A little birdie told me that one of our guests here is a Tom Collins man.
After cocktails, they all sit down for dinner, where Greg talks about milking cats, Jack reads a poem about his late mother,
While the cancer ate away your organs, like an unstoppable rebel force.
and Dina makes a spectacular-looking pot roast. After dinner, when Greg stumbles upon Jack's secret chamber in the guest room, complete with a polygraph machine, he is busted by Jack, who puts him under a lie detector test and opens with a question about that pot roast.
Did we eat pot roast for dinner tonight?
Yes.
Was it undercooked?
No, it was rare. It was a little rare for my taste. But I
I'm
would.
just kidding. I'm just...
First, we'll get started on our pot roast, for which you'll need 2.5 pounds of chuck roast. You can use a leaner cut of meat if you like, but I like the marbling and tenderness you get with the chuck. We're going to transfer this over to a small roasting pan, or what I thought was a roasting pan when I bought it, but we'll get to that in a second. And we're going to cover the chuck roast in olive oil, and then transfer the roast to a plate where we'll cover it in salt and pepper. Then we're going to add some olive oil to the pan, and then put the roast back in to sear once the oil is hot. Add a little more salt and pepper to the other side, and as the meat was searing, I quickly realized this wasn't the right vessel for this operation, so I pivoted and transferred the beef over to a medium Dutch oven and finished searing there. I highly recommend starting in a Dutch oven to begin with. Once the roast has seared nicely on both sides, transfer to a plate while we prep the veggies for our roast. These veggies include 1 yellow onion, roughly chopped, 3 stalks of celery, roughly chopped, 3 carrots, roughly chopped, and 6 to 8 cloves of garlic, peeled and whole. Put all the veggies in a bowl and then transfer them over to the hot oil in the Dutch oven. Give the veggies a stir and allow them to soften for a couple minutes. Then deglaze the pan with 2 cups of red wine. Then we're going to set our roast on top of the veggies in liquid, which prevents the meat from frying on the bottom of the Dutch oven while roasting. Then transfer to a 350-degree oven for 1 hour. When you're about halfway through your cooking time, it's time to start prepping your mashed potatoes, for which I'm using 2 pounds of Yukon Gold potatoes, which you will peel and then bring over to your stove. And meanwhile, as you can see, halfway through your cooking, your roast is already looking great. And we have a large pot of salted boiling water ready for our potatoes. So just baste the meat a few times with the juices from the bottom. And now we'll start boiling our potatoes. One by one, transfer them into the boiling water, and before we put our roast back in the oven, we're going to add some more aromatics of thyme, sage, and rosemary, and then transfer the roast back to the oven to finish cooking. After about 20 minutes in the boiling water, we'll check on the doneness of the potatoes by sticking a skewer through one. If the skewer goes all the way through, then they are ready to mash. Strain the potatoes and then set them aside while we remove our roast from the oven. When the roast is out of the oven, you can see it has developed a beautiful crust on the outside and smells phenomenal. Remove the roast from the Dutch oven, reserving the juices, and transfer to a plate and let the meat rest for 30 minutes while we finish up our mashed potatoes. With our strained potatoes in the same pot as before, we'll one by one add the potatoes through a potato ricer. If you don't have a potato ricer, a regular masher will work just fine. To the rice potatoes, we will add 1 stick of butter. Mash the butter into the potatoes with a regular potato masher. Then you're gonna add some half and half. I'm only gonna add a little bit at a time and probably use between 1/4 to 1/2 cup total. Then mash the potatoes up a little more before adding a little bit of salt and a little freshly cracked pepper. Then we are going to whip the potatoes up with a whisk. Stir the potatoes so that they get a nice fluffy consistency that we are looking for. Then transfer the potatoes into an oven-safe dish and keep them warm in the oven at the lowest setting possible. Now it's time to start our gravy, or it's actually more like a jus. I guess we'll call it a groovy. Our groovy starts with a tablespoon of butter in a saucepan. When the butter is melted, we'll add a heaping tablespoon of flour to the saucepan. Immediately whisk the two together to create a basic roux. Now add the reserved and strained juices from your roast, followed by 1/4 to 1/2 cup of beef stock, depending on how liquidy you want your groovy. Finally, add a little bit of black pepper and whisk together more before transferring to a gravy boat for serving. Now it's time to start our Tom Collins, which starts in 1 small shaker tin. To our tin, we'll add 2 ounces of gin, as well as 1 ounce of fresh squeezed lemon juice and 1/2 ounce of simple syrup. Then we'll put some ice in our big tin and lock in our small tin and give everything a good shake. We are going to serve this in a Collins glass or a highball glass, to which we'll add some ice. And then I like to put a little bit of seltzer in the bottom before straining everything in, and I'm using Topo Chico. Now double strain our cocktail into the glass before topping with a little bit more seltzer. And now I like to incorporate everything with a bar spoon and then garnish with a lemon wheel, as well as a bright red cherry, which I don't typically add to a Tom Collins but is present in the movie, and finally a straw, which you will now see is going to become what we in the biz call a continuity error. And there you have it, your Tom Collins with pot roast and mashed potatoes is complete. Now it's time to carve your roast, which you are going to need to cut against the grain. Now, if only I could find that grain. Luckily, with the help of my lovely sous chef and fittingly for the movie, my fiance, I have located that grain. Thanks, Bales. And once you have located the grain, it is time to carve. If you have a proper carving knife, which I don't, I recommend using that. Slice the beef as thinly as possible, and you should see that it is a perfect medium rare. If, like Greg, you prefer your beef a little more medium or well done, I recommend roasting it for 15 to 20 more minutes, depending on your desired internal temp. And finally, your Tom Collins with pot roast and mashed potatoes is done. Now there's nothing left to do but to taste it. We'll start by pouring on a little of that groovy, and then we'll give it a taste. The pot roast is stellar and remarkably tender, and while Greg complained about it being too rare for his taste, it's right on the money for mine. Naturally, this pot roast goes great with these decadent and pillowy mashed potatoes. They're both comfort food at their finest. But how does everything pair with the Tom Collins? Well, because the roast beef and mashed potatoes are both so heavy, the light freshness of the Tom Collins really makes this an ideal cocktail pairing. So I'm giving this pairing 2 thumbs up. If you like the channel, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Please leave any video suggestions in the comments below. All recipes will be included in the link in the video description. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Consuming Cinema. And don't forget to join us next week when we make a pairing from Django Unchained. Thank you for watching.